We have that exactly in Greek. The Greek name for freedom is eleutheria, and this leut, it is the name of the people, laios in Greek. So there is an idea that liberty, it is the proper condition of the people. What is the people? It is everybody that he is free. Free of what? Free of what? Of speaking.
So for this last course devoted to hermeneutics of the subject, we will rush a bit. Here, the point that Foucault will emphasize is this practical dimension. That is to say, how do you do that? We speak about
The development of the subject, we speak about the practice, the techniques of the subject. That is to say, technically talking, everything which was under the name of asceticism, ascesis in Greek, means discipline. That is to say, practical exercise, devoted to purification. So practices of purification, disciplines of purification could be a good definition, a translation for ascesis or asceticism. So what is this asceticism about? What is the content of this kind of practice? How is that possible to practice the truth? Not to know the truth, but to practice it. And we've got, by the way, 3 types of activity which seems to maybe for you now very, very familiar, because we are doing that at school and at university. This is the school practice, which was forged during that time. So now you are more Hellenistic than Chinese. Listening, that configuration. I talk, you shut up, but you can ask questions, of course. Reading and writing. And this triple practice was forged by the Stoics. In Plato's academy, no reading, no writing, but mathematical exercise and listening. So this is not as obvious as it seems. So what does it mean to listen? In a way, to practice the truth, of course. According to Plutarch, the sense of hearing is problematic, ambiguous, but more problematic than ambiguous, or problematic because ambiguous. Because it seems to have 2 sources, 2 origins. One is pathetic or sensible, and that is to say, for the Stoics, passive. Passive means you receive. You're doing nothing but receiving. Maybe receiving is an activity, but not for the Romans and the late Greeks. And also, hearing is a logical, logikos activity. And that's why when I am saying in English, but also in Chinese, by the way, do you hear me? That means, do you understand me, or do you physically, are you able to hear me? So there is an understanding dimension of hearing, and there is a sensible dimension of hearing. And the problem is that it is not because your ears are open that you understand. So we need to practice hearing itself to turn in a more understand dimension. So according to Seneca, remember who were the great boss of Stoicism? Plutarch Seneca, Marcus Aurelius. By the way, Marcus Aurelius was not, never, recognized as a master of Stoicism. He never published nothing. The stories and the history of the thought for himself, that is to say, it's the name of the book of Seneca, it was totally lost. After Marcus Aurelius died, nobody knew that he wrote these texts. And it was rediscovered centuries after that in, it was in Constantinopolis library. And an emissary of the Pope, not the Roman Pope, the other one, said, Abe, help, we discovered a text, and it seems to be written by the Emperor Marcus Aurelius. So the way and the fact of considering Marcus Aurelius as a philosopher is not really true. There is something a bit fabricated in the picture or in the image of the great emperor philosopher. Marcus Aurelius was not recognized as a philosopher during the time he was emperor, by no one. It was totally a secret activity. But what is interesting for us, the practice of Marcus Aurelius, the practice of truth, was to read, to write, handwriting, diary writing, the exercise of writing to discover your own relationship to truth, to untruth yourself. But let's go back to, and Epictetus is the last one. Epictetus, Seneca, Plutarch, and Marcus Aurelius, in a bit fabricated way. So according to Seneca, the ambiguity of hearing arises only from the passivity of hearing, which has both advantage and disadvantage. That is to say, the understanding hearing is perfectly clear. The problem is not that in the fact that hearing is both sensible and intellectual. The problem is it is sensible. And there is two dimensions. There is a good point in sensibility, and there is unfortunately a bad point. That's the Seneca ad. For example, why it's pretty interesting, hearing, even in its passive or sensible dimension? Because you can listen many things without really understanding them. Nevertheless, it seems that something can enter in your brain. That's the idea of the seed, you know? You don't understand nothing, the seed in the earth. Seed. And it grows by itself. That's why, for example, I don't know if you have that in China, but when I was young, there was this totally nuts idea. My mother did that to me, to hear foreign language during sleeping time. And maybe, you know, you will become totally fluent. Me, it was for German. Imagine my night with Adolf Hitler. So during my night sleep, I had to listen with my Walkman on the ancestor of the iPod, German courses. Totally absurd. It does not work. But this is the idea. Even if you are not, if you are not paying really attention, even if you cannot understand nothing, there is something that goes inside you through the whole of the ears. The problem that because it is undiscriminately open, hearing allows anything to enter, and there is a lack of discrimination. And everything tends to be confused. So, hearing, because it is a very open sense, needs attention to direct the understanding. as a pre-work of discrimination. According to Epictetus, the ambiguity, so hearing is always ambiguous for the Stoics, but not in the same way. The ambiguity, reversely, has to do with the logikos, the logic parts, or the understanding parts, which itself entails also a sort of passivity. For the hearing in question, here is essentially listening to a word and not listening to any kind of sound. Listening means listening an understandable sound, that is to say, sentences, words. And the problem is that in every logos or logoi, that is, in every species or discourse, there is always a dimension of lexis, that is to say, a play with the voice, an intensification. Now I am speaking very slow and I speak very quickly. There is rhythm, and this is problematic. It adds something sensible inside the intelligible itself. And this lexis, that is to say the way of speaking, the intonation, implies a sort of art, of techne, from the speaker, and also it needs a certain experience, a certain attention, clever attention, on the part of the listener. Without this, we tend to get nothing but inconveniences out of listening. If you don't know how to talk, if you don't know how to listen, maybe it's better to close your ear. So the speech has to do here with techne. That is to say, a knowledge accompanied with truth, and a practical knowledge accompanied with truth, and some sort of rational organization. Aletus, it deals with truth. Metalogu, accompanied with truth, accompanied with some sort of structure, of rationality. That's the definition of techne, given by Aristotle. Exis poieticae, a manner of production, that is a practical knowledge. Knowledge is aletus, structured, rationally determined. And so, it seems that for Epictetus, speech, the art of speaking, is an art. That is to say, it belongs to knowledge. It belongs to rational knowledge. It is practical, but rational knowledge. Reversely, listening is not an art, but just experience. So there is a disequilibrium between the speaker and the listener. The speaker is a man of art, that is to say, of rational knowledge. The listener, no. Listening is not an art. And I don't know why. Why this distinction? And it seems, by the way, it seems that there is no real art of listening, but there is actually an art of speaking, named rhetoric. But there is no rhetoric from the side of the listener. So the degree of truth is not the same. And that must explain many problems in understandings. You've got in face of you someone who deals with an art of speaking, but as listener, you cannot become an artist of listening. And that's why it's always possible to fool the audience. Because the degree of mastership is not the same. So because techne presupposes a knowledge, that is acquired precisely by listening. So it seems also to turn. So there is no art of listening in the strict sense, but rather a certain acquired maturity, which was named empeiria in Greek, experience in listening. So knowing how to listen can be acquired. However, and it requires certain amounts of training, which is in Greek tribe. Train, tribe, same roots. In order to become experienced, empeirikos, you have to train. Art, that is to say techne, because it is meta logu, it does not need so much training. Training deals a lot with habitudes, that is to say with experience, with some sort of even biological process to have an habit. So how is that possible to become not artistic in the way of listening, but experienced? 3 ways, still in Epictetus. The first is silence. That is to say, listening without interfering, objecting, giving one's opinion, or even teaching. Through silence, which lasts 5 years for Epicurean students, no, even no, total silence. And through silence, says Plutarch, we find the profound and mysterious and the sober. You endeep, something seems to be endeepened in you. Mysterious is quite interesting. Why mystery? Because in silence you enter into something like invisible. You are able to access to what is not obvious. You see behind. You understand behind. And not, you understand in a non-immediate relation with reality. You are able to listen to the echoes of reality, and many echoes of words and discourses. And sober, because you access to some sort of simplicity in the way of standing, in the way of being. Because for being able to be silent, you have to become immobile in a certain way. You have to immobile yourself. And that's precisely the second point. You have to enter in a semantically relevant immobility of the body. That is to say, listening is also about a certain body posture, which is a guarantee of morality for the Stoics. Restlessness and fidgeting are always signs of vices and moral disorders for the Stoics when you're like that. That's not a good sign. Someone who is always jumping and being able to, like a Slavoj Žižek, that's problematic. Intuitively talking. There is something not well structured. Added to this is a way of being motionless, not like a statue, not at all, but precisely like a body that understands. Immobility that signifies attentive listening, attuned to the rhythm of logos. You have to not move in an intelligent way. That's relevant immobility. Your body must be attuned to the rhythm of logos. That's an interesting idea. When you are a teacher, you know that perfectly. When your students are stupid or asleep. There is a way of non-moving which is also problematic. When it seems that your body is immobile but not attuned to the secret rhythm of logos, but attuned to death. Boring death. You know. And thirdly, the way to practice or to become experienced in listening is direct your attention to the pragmata. That is to say, to be able with you here to go right to the things themselves and not to the form of the speech. You understand the point immediately. You are not sensible anymore to rhetoric. You become philosophers with your ears. You understand the point. And because of that, you are able to memorize the essential. That is to say, to collect multiplicities of ideas, opinions, examples, to collect that in a unity. And of course, because it is collected, you are able to keep that in mind. And when you do that, you are able to make the logos, to make the discourse, to make the course, to make the lecture. Now, here, lecture is a good translation for logos. To make the lecture a paraskoe. That is to say, something that will help you in life, for real. Then the speech we can hear can become a precept for action. So it is because of listening that you can transform the speech into something that helps in action. So the transition between theory and practice is made in the listening activity. Even if the lecture of the professor is highly active in a certain way or highly practical, if you are not a good listener, it remains theoretical. So it is because of the hearing practice, of the listening practice, that something can become helpful. That is to say, it is in the ears that the logos becomes soteriological. That is to say, helpful, transforming. It is not in the logos itself. Secondly, or the second content of these disciplines of the truth was reading. Reading as an asceticism is here not separable from meditation. This vocabule came back a lot in the course of Foucault. So meditation, meditatio, it is very totally Latin. Meditatio, meditation in English, meditation in German, meditation in French. So we are totally Latin on that point. And this comes directly from the source of Roman Stoicism, and notably Cicero. That's a quote from Cicero, which is not in Foucault, but unfortunately Foucault neglected Cicero's influence, which was totally huge. And Cicero wrote, "Study is the meditation of texts." In Latin, studio est meditatio textum. this is no, you have to pay attention to that. You have to be able to listen that. Study is the meditation of text. So it does not mean study is to read text, neither understand text, neither memorize text, but it is meditation of text. What does it mean? He's using a highly technical vocabulary here. And while Foucault is quite right to understand the asceticism of reading in terms of the cardinal notion of meditation, he is completely, unfortunately, mistaken as to the etymology or the origin of this term, which should not be traced back to the Greek melete. That's a mistake he made always. I don't know why. I know exactly why, but I don't know why no one said to him that he was totally mistaken. Because, of course, why Foucault wanted to link etymologically meditation to melete? Because we've got epimeleia. So he wants to make the jump. That is to say, meditation deals directly with the care of the self. Epimeleia. In terms of meaning, yes, he's right. It's perfectly right. There is, of course, a very semantic relation between the care of the self and the meditation. But this relation is not in the words. We don't need too much proof, kill the proof, in a certain way. And so, no, that's absolutely not the good etymology. Melete deals with the idea of training, to exercise. But as I told you maybe before, meditation comes from the Greek mantano. And mantano means to observe, to pay attention. Exactly like guan in Chinese, in guanyin. To look precisely, to observe. Mantano in Greek. Or medos. Medos in Greek means to measure. To take the real measure of things through thinking. That is to say, to evaluate the weight, the value of reality. By the way, the word measure, measurement, meta, yeah, the meta, 1 meter, 2 meter, 3 meter, comes from the same root as meditation. It is the root med. Mens means measure, measurement, but also to pay attention. That is to say, to take the full measure of reality. That is the exercise of attention. So we don't have exactly the same idea that we have in melete. But in fact, Foucault used this era to justify a good intuition, which is quite correct as to the meaning of ancient meditation. That is to say, I quote Foucault here, to make these true things that we think or observe, we become the subject who thinks true and finally acts well. And that's perfectly a meditative idea. With an intense activity of observing something else, you become something else. Meditation is a way of looking which, in a certain way, disrupt the relation between object and subject. Science cannot meditate because the condition of possibility of science is to constitute objects. That's the works of science. The first works of science is to objectify, to find an object, to build an object. in meditation, there is some sort of reverse. It is neither subjective nor objective. But the relationship between subject and object is different. You observe with such an intensity that it transforms you. That's why in Buddhism, in some meditation named shamatha vipassana, that is to say in Chinese, zhi guan, zhi guan, zhi, 对，止观，对，摩诃止观 of 止意。And this is an摩诃止观. It's a text written by Zhi Yi. He's a Chinese master from the Tiantai school of Buddhism. Good text. That's the best Chinese text for Buddhist meditation. You don't have any other as good as that one. Unfortunately, it is highly difficult to understand because it is written in Buddhist Chinese. So difficult to access. But it's a good text. And he explained the two pillars of Chinese meditation. The first is shamatha, how to cool, how to be immobile in a certain way. And vipassana, which means meditation. That is to say, how to observe intensively. And in these exercises, it is because you are focusing yourself as a madman on one point, that is to say, you are intensifying the activity of observing something, that the thing disappears, you disappear, and something is totally transformed. That's totally meditative. So in reading, you have that too. Because you are reading a text with a so intense attention, the book transforms you. It is the only possibility to be influenced. If you are reading the book like an object, you are not able to understand. Because you will see just the object book, and the distance is too high. And the distance is too high because the observation is not intense enough. For precising what does meditation means, Foucault take relevantly the apt example of meditari mortem, that is to say, meditation on death, which was a very intense Stoic practice. Also, you have that in the famous memento mori. You know that memento mori or not? You know? Memento mori was a Roman practice. When you became emperor, for good reason, because assassination was pretty, it happens pretty often. So in memento mori means, in Latin means remember you will die. Remember you are mortal. Memento mori means remember that you are not a god. You will quick, very quick. And when an emperor was crowned in Rome, a priest, at the very moment when he was crowned, the priest said to the future emperor, here, memento mori. Good mood, good ambience. But he said, remember that you will die. That it was a ritual practice. Interesting, why? There is wisdom. Despite the fact that many Roman emperors were totally crazy. That's the memento mori. So you can practice the memento mori each time that something very good happens to you. Imagine that you have someone behind you saying, remember, you will die. Memento mori. So here, what does it mean to meditate death? That is to say, meditari mortem. It is not a question of considering the phenomenon of death, but of placing oneself in death through thought. Meditaberis in morte. It was also a very interesting expression which used the passive tone of Latin. That is to say, meditaberis in morte means you have to be meditated in death. You see how it turns. Meditation puts yourself in the situation through the activity of thinking. So meditation is not an exercise of the subject on thought or on an object of thought, but a play, a kind of game of thought on the subject. You use the thinking power to transform yourself. Virtual simulation, in a certain way, is that. But you need a technical device. Here, there is no technology, that is to say, there is no intermediary. So it is a situation of the subject through thought. Nota bene here, Foucault wisely notes that Descartes' meditations are still akin to this ancient exercise. I quote Foucault because this is a very good intuition about the statue of Cartesian text, which is not as metaphysical as it sounds. Sometimes it is a bit spiritual too. Descartes doesn't think about everything that might be doubtful or indubitable in the world. Descartes puts himself in the position of the subject who doubts everything. And that's why he named his works meditation, metaphysical meditation, and not metaphysical speculation, for example, or metaphysical treaty. Because it is an experience of thought that you don't have to doubt about everything. That's absurd. You have to put yourself in an absolute doubt. You have to become doubt. You have to feel that the soil, the ground, is exiting brutally. Everything that you consider as safe and sure seems to shake. That is a spiritual experience. And that's why it is from that experience that you discover cogito, I think. That is to say, even when everything seems to shake, I am. That's interesting. That's a real experience that you can do. It is not an idea, it is not a belief. That's why he named that metaphysical meditation. It's the experience of thinking, not as theoretical as it seems. And the last moment of the ascesis is writing, as an auxiliary of reading, which must always be linked to reading. So reading is reinforced by writing, and they must always alternate. That's the Seneca position. When you write, you read. When you read, you have to write. So writing as an asceticism, therefore, takes two forms. One is what we might call reading notes, which is upomnemata in Greek. That is to say, you are reading a text and you have to take notes. You have to make your own comments at the very moment you read. And we have that always. I don't know if your professor are telling that in China, but in France, when you are reading without a pen and a notebook, you are cast out. You need to be burned alive. There is no reading without pen. There is no book without pen. And if you only have a pen, you need also a small notebook. And that's reading. So someone who is reading a lot without pen is not a reader, a real one. And the other, so you've got this sort of correspondency between reading a text and writing about your impression when you read that text. That is to say, you exist as a reader, that is to say, as a subject when you are reading the text of another one. And you open the possibility of a dialogue in which you exist as a reader and also as an author, because you are writing and reading. So you are transforming yourself. You are participating. You are not just passive. And the second aspect, it is some sort of spiritual correspondence, which was very used in the Roman period, especially, for example, the amazing, very beautiful correspondence between Seneca and Lucilius. It is one of the most famous works of Seneca, Letter to Lucilius. Lucilius was a dear friend of Seneca. And in a certain way, instead of writing a personal diary, he wrote letters to someone else. And that's a very interesting experience of the care of the self and having a relation of truth with yourself. You need another. You need to speak to someone else to make the truth happens between you and you. And of course, these spiritual correspondence has found an interesting echo since the end of the 16th century through diaries, intimate diaries, and autobiography. Marcus Aurelius' Thought for Myself is an early example of that. But also the essays of Montaigne is a very late and some sort of survival example of that practice. It's a very strange text, the essays. Essays means to try. Let's try to think for myself. That's the idea. So when Montaigne used, now this vocabulary seems to be very common. But at the time of Montaigne, no, it was an invention of Montaigne. It is because of Montaigne that we are speaking now about essays. Essays come from the French essai, means to try. Let's try to think. And that's exactly that, thoughts for myself. And that's very interesting exercise that you have to do if you like that, and if you intend to philosophize. When you've got a question, a topic, a theme that interests you, try to write something about. Just try to write. Just try. Don't need other books. Don't need to study too much. Just try to explain yourself with your own interest for that. And that's a very good exercise. This is not science. This is not important. This is just asceticism. This is the discipline of the practice of truth. And this is a very important exercise to do. If you want to become a philosopher, you have to do that exercise. Just try 1 page, 2 pages, not too much, to write about everything that interests you or question you. That is said to start a first step in thinking. Open a first step in thinking. And here we have also the idea of an exercise that consists in advising in truth, as well as telling oneself in truth, which is not exactly the same as a confession. Do you see the difference? Confession is very Christian, and Christian means that you have to tell your own sin. That is to say, you have to become some sort of judge of yourself. I did good, I did bad. This is not here the problem. The problem is not making the part between good behaviors and bad behaviors. The point is to be able to just be true with yourself. Being totally honest. And for that, you need some practice. It is not obvious at all. We are always too mean or too nice with ourselves. It's very difficult to be just fair. It's amazingly difficult to be true with yourself. And true does not mean judge. It is not a legal understanding of truth. Remember, Foucault was amazingly clever on that point. Don't jump too quickly on legal interpretation. I don't know if you have that, because I am working now on that topic, the difference between Chinese ritual system and legal system. That's totally different. The rules in rituals and the rule in legal system, despite the fact that they are norms or rules, they are not the same at all. And even maybe they are totally opposites. And so I don't know if in China you are thinking now immediately in terms of rights, of laws, of legality. This is something very obvious for us in Europe, because we forge, because of the Romans, we forge our entire civilization under the foundation of law. That is the law system. And that's why rituality in Europe was not as important as it was in China. Rituality, li.
Yeah, but I think in China it's also not so strong. I think in China ritual exercise is not.
No, now it's totally lost.
Yeah, totally lost.
But there is a way of thinking behind that. Yeah.
I think even in modern China, people tend to think that maybe ritual and morality and law are kind of integration, and there isn't a clear boundary.
Distinction, yeah.
Yeah, distinction.
Yeah, and
between
these come from Li.
Yeah.
I read the Li Ji something like 12 times. I know almost by heart the text. And it's amazing how the distinction between Dao De, Li, and Fa is not very clear. But why? There is a good reason. Because everything is understood from an idea of rules, an idea of ruling, an idea of zhi, that comes from Li, that comes from ritual. And this is not the case in Europe. The idea of zhi, the idea of order, the idea of rules, norm, comes from law. Law judge acts and treat acts as objects, not Li, not ritual. Ritual treats much more attitudes. And it treats attitude before this attitude happens. The sanction is not the same, for example. So the law system and the right system are very, very different and sometimes opposites. So that's why I ask, in Europe, we've got the problem to interpret too quickly every domain of reality in terms of law. I have the right, I don't have the right. Sometimes it's not a problem of right. And here, for example, it's absolutely not a problem of right. And maybe that's why it was Roman, because it was the Romans that invented the universal law system. The Roman law, this is the canonic law. No, the canonic law was the church law. But nevertheless, in Middle Age in Europe, we taught canonic law, that is the law of the church, and Roman law, which was the civilian law. And maybe because they was under the pressure of the law, they invented a place free from the law system, which was the true relationship with yourself, which is not a judge relationship with yourself, which is not something that deals with, I have the right, I don't have the right. I am wrong. No, that's not the problem. And that's why it's so important, I'm telling that, because parrèsia, the free speaking, the frank speaking, is not something that deals with any sort of law, any sort of right. This is not the problem. So, in confession, which is Christian, you have to tell the truth according to the law of God. That's why it's legal. Here, in that perspective, there is no legal system above you or beside you or as the foundation of your own relationship. There is nothing legal. This is absolutely private, in a certain way. No public. Because the public field is also the legal field, especially in the Roman organization of the world. So here, in this triple asceticism of listening, reading, and writing, that is the historical relationship between the subject and truth, is practically constituted. However, this history, which stretched from Hellenistic asceticism to autobiography, was the Christian confession I spoke to you, and this is one of a deep, profound change. In Christianity, for example, the relationship between subject and truth concerns the obligation to tell the truth. Obligation means legal. Yeah. Obligation is the law system. You have to. And primarily, it concerns the disciple, not the master. Things were totally different in antiquity. The listener, who is thus led to the truth by the master's discourse, doesn't necessarily have to tell the truth about himself. Does not need to be sincere with the master. He doesn't have to make a confession, or at least not in the same way as a patient tells his doctor the truth, so that he can make a proper diagnosis and propose a suitable remedy. Moreover, the ethic of telling the truth in ancient times, or during antiquity, concerned the master more than the disciple. The parrèsia is the technique of the master, not of the disciple. So the parrèsia is not the confession at all. The ethic of telling the truth concerns more the master. The ethics of the disciple or the listener are more concerned with silence. than with telling anything and maybe the truth. So with this, Foucault finally arrived at that notion of parrèsia. So parrèsia is basically what responds on the master side to the disciple obligation of silence. And Foucault then recalls a very interesting translation, fact which he doesn't explain very well, but that's the translation, the Latin translation of the Greek parrèsia by libertas. Interesting. That's a liberty, freedom. And that's an amazing translation because it is totally not lexically right, but philosophically perfect. Because it sees the core. It sees the meaning core of what is at stake in parrèsia. Libertas, liberty, freedom. Of course, a priori, or lexically talking. This is a bad translation. But it's an amazing translation in terms of thinking. In this Latin translation, there is an attempt to think from the condition from which parrèsia is possible. It is a transcendental translation. Parrèsia is a very simple word. It is pan plus rhesis. You have rhesis in rhetoric. Pan means all, everything. Rhesis, rhetoric, means to speak. You have that, for example, in Sanskrit. Remember, Latin, Greek, French, Celtics, Slavics, Indian, Iranians, same family. Vrata in Sanskrit, same roots as rhesis. And of course, in Latin, verbum, verb. Remember the beginning of the St. John Gospel. At the beginning, there was the verb. But you know that the Gospel of John was originally written in Greek, right? It was not. At the beginning, there was rhesis, but logos. Lexically talking, logos is not verbum. Verbum is rhesis, that is to say, the speech, the discourse. The blah blah blahing. So parrèsia means you have to tell everything. Nothing must be hidden. You don't have to conceal anything. So you have to publify yourself in a certain way. Totally open yourself. It is a mode of saying that hides nothing or conceals nothing. And what is libertas? Liberty. This is the name of the people. And you have that in German. When you say the people in German, it is die Leute. Same roots as liber. In archaic Latin, the name of the people, because people come from the Latin populus. Populus means many, a lot, which is totally stupid. It is not the real name of the people. The real name of the people was liber. And liber means free. We have that exactly in Greek. The Greek name for freedom is eleuteria. And this leut, it is the name of the people, laios in Greek. So there is an idea that liberty, it is the proper condition of the people. What is the people? It is everybody that is free. Free of what? Free of what? Of speaking. That's why they translated. That is to say, a man of the people or woman of the people is the one who is able to tell everything for free, without consequences. He has the right, the full right to speak. in the public place. He's the one who is able to speak in front of everybody. And that's why the Latin understood immediately, remember, in terms of right, parrèsia, to tell everything, as the right of the free people to tell everything in the public place. So that's amazingly thinking. And why it is interesting? Because when you want to translate in English parrèsia, you will use to speak for true or to frankly speaking. But why do you name frank? What is frank? This is my people. And why French are named Frank? This is not because we are French, because Frank, it's the name of a tribe that came from Germany. Frank, free. Frank means the people who is free. Exactly the same idea. When you are translating parrèsia, frankly speaking, you are in the same idea as libertas. Exactly the same intuition. So we can see here, moreover, how parrèsia is also based on a Socratic conflict between philosophy and rhetoric. Remember, rhesis, we've got the idea of rhetoric. And of course, the idea of parrèsia takes the side of philosophy, because rhetoric in the conflict, in the Platonic conflict, is from the side of lie, and philosophy is from the side of truth. Parrèsia is true speech, not in the sense of plausible or convincing speech. This is, where is convincing? This is convincing, this is the ideal of rhetoric. The top of rhetoric is to convince, not to be true. That's why rhetoric always deals with manipulation. In philosophy, you don't need manipulation. You have to reopen, if not the truth, the access to truth. So more than a technique of saying, parrèsia is an ethic of saying, with the aim not of convincing the listener, but of enabling him to appropriate a truth that he can make its own. And for that, you have to be free. You have to be free to tell everything, without any sort of manipulation, secrecy, pressure, any sort of that. Rhetoric is not a free regime of speaking, because for being good, you have to manipulate others. And by manipulating others, you are manipulating yourself, because you have to cheat. You have to play a game, and this game is not an open access to truth. It is always bias. Next course, still about that, about the ancient role of asceticism and how it constitutes the subject as a subject of truth. Remember, during the modern time, the subject is no more the subject of truth. The truth deals with the object, and that's the scientific revolution. It is a permutation of truth from the subject to the object. So it is the role of parrèsia to perform the translation from the truth of discourse to the truth of the subjects. And parrèsia thus refer first and foremost to a moral quality or attitude, that is to say in Greek, to an ethos. In Chinese, how should we say ethos? Xing. Could be good. Yeah. Something like that. That is, ethos in Greek is some sort of psychological or an inner quality, like the 5-1 in Kongzi, in Mangzi too. So parrèsia is not a technique of speaking, it is a sort of attitude. When you are speaking frankly, it is not a technique. It is not rhetorical. It is just a disposition, a relation that you have with yourself that allows you to speak openly. But it's also, of course, a set of techniques that enable some sort of transmission. Because remember, parrèsia, it is at first the duty of the master, not of the disciple. And the master is the one who talks, is the one who must be able to deliver a sort of discourse. So he must be able to do that, and he must have some techniques to do that. Remember that speaking was a technique, listening was an experience. That's why we were speaking about that at the beginning. So if the parrèsia is from the side of the speaker, it also involves a sort of technique, a know-how, a technique. So there is a sort of techne involved in parrèsia. Moreover, parrèsia refers to a form of freedom, openness, or frankness that we saw, which is why this Greek term has been translated, as we say, as free speech, straight talk. Foucault also used the French expression franc-parler. And remember, the frank people are exactly the free people. And Foucault sets out to define parrèsia more precisely, first, negatively, what it is not, and after that, positively, what it is. So what's the negative definition of parrèsia? What parrèsia is not. And the opponents, or the contrary of parrèsia, is first flattery, and second rhetoric. They are not opposed in the same way. Flattery is opposed to parrèsia as vice is opposed to virtue. And rhetoric is opposed to parrèsia as two different types of language arts, two different techne. Rhetoric is a techne logike, that is to say, a techniques of the discourse, how to make a discourse, while parrèsia is a virtue applied to language. So it is an applied virtue. Let's see flattery. Flattery is linked to language and to power insofar as it is a misappropriation. That is to say, an abused or a misused. The flatterer used language to get what he wants from his superior, always. That is to say, flattery always implies a political situation. Always. It's also a detour from the true world, from the true words, which is precisely a detour from the subject that is the superior. Flattery so blocks the superior access to self-knowledge. Flattery is always made by an inferior to a superior in a way to block the access of truth to the superior. The flatterer's words is aimed at the speaker, who takes the power of the listener, whereas parrèsia words is aimed at the listener, and more precisely at the autonomy and independence of the listener, to empower him, who through these true words find its own way or own relationship to truth. and thus can constitute himself precisely as a subject. So flattery is desubjectifying. Parrèsia is subjectifying. Because I am telling you about you false reality. I am derealizing you by flattering you. The relationship between power and speech changed during the Hellenistic and Roman periods. As we moved from the city system, remember the city system was not only Greek, but Roman. Rome at the beginning was a republic, that is to say a city. City is not a town. Be careful. City does not mean town. City, it's a political organization, not a geographical situation. So when we moved from the city system, Roman Republic and Greek democracy, for example, to Hellenistic monarchy and Roman Empire, the relationship between speech and power changed radically. As a result, for example, the role of parrèsia and its opposite, flattery, were also modified. It is the question of the prince's moral direction that now arises. You have to be able to tell the truth to the future emperor. If it is not possible, he will become a tyrant. That's an obligation. So in a certain way, parrèsia will become something important in the education of the prince. It will have a crucial political role, which was not the case, or not in the same way, in the previous republican system. The parrèsia of the one who advised the prince acquire a fundamental role in the constitution of the ruler ethics. That is to say, his constitution as a royal subject. Conversely, flattery, which in Plato belonged more to the erotic realm, seduction, and then became socio-political, is a major risk of corruption of the prince's ethos, an obstacle to the self-knowledge, that is to say, to his full subjectivation, which needs a free relationship to the truth. For becoming a subject, you need a free relationship to yourself. And if the emperor or the king is not a subject, it is catastrophe. So parrèsia differ also rather than oppose, we should say, rhetoric. Rhetoric is an art that can be taught, and as such, it has its own rules. You can write manual about rhetoric. It is impossible to write a manual for parrèsia. So parrèsia is not an art in that sense. That is to say, it cannot be taught, or it has no fixed rules. What lies at the heart of parrèsia, this is not episteme. This is not knowledge in general, or even the knowledge of the general, but another form of knowledge which was named in Greek phronèsis, which is one of the most important vocable in Greece. Phronèsis. Phronèsis should be translated as to be advised. And it was translated very badly in Latin as prudentia. You have that in English from the French, prudence, that is to say, being cautious. No, phronèsis is much more than just being cautious. This is not Xiaoxin perspective. This is someone who is able, a phronimos is the guy who had phronèsis. A phronimos is someone who is able to give its own version of reality, the one who has its own voice, the one who is able to really speak for truth. So phronèsis is totally linked with parrèsia. Phronèsis, it is that you must have if you want to be able to speak for truth. It is a cognitive disposition based on intelligence and attention and experience. 3 poles. Metis. Metis, it is cleverness. You're quick, you're clever. 聪明, that's metis. 聪明. Medos. No? Meditation. Medos. To pay attention. To be focused. And not only focused, but to be able to discriminate. Make differences. Seeing differences. And emperia, that is to say, you have to live your life for real. That's lived. Emperia means it is really lived. Improved. Tasted. But this phronèsis is based not on rules, but on occasions, moments, on situation, that is to say, kairos, between people in which it can be judicious to speak truthfully. Finally, the aim of rhetoric is to convince others through the art of language. Surprisingly, while parrèsia does have an effect on others, it is not at all aimed at convincing them or winning their support through the spoken words. The master of parrèsia has absolutely no personal interest in using this frank way of speaking, this straight way of talking. It's an absolute disinterested gift in which what is given is what is true, in such a way that the listener can make its own, appropriate it in order to appropriate himself. There is no way to convince. The truth is said, and you have to dispose yourself with that freely. The positive definition of parrèsia. You have that in Philodemus, he was an Epicurean philosopher, and he defined parrèsia as a techne, so as like a technique, but not methodical. That is to say, in relation with rule to be followed. But he named that techne conjectural. That is to say, in relation to kairos. Kairos, it's a definition of time as moments. It's the good moments. It's a bad moment. That is kairos. Not time. Time is too general. The good time, the bad time. This is kairos. In the methodological aspect, there is no kairos. It is some sort of abstract time. When you have to pay attention to the good moment for speaking, it is another form of intelligence involved. The master of parrèsia is also the 2 axes of formation of a spiritual community or school. And that's very Epicurean perspective. The speech of truth also constitutes the vertical and the horizontal axes necessary for any human society. The master of parrèsia is some sort of vertical, living transmission of a finding true words. In this case, for example, you have got Epicurus' words, and Philodemus is the line of transmission of that true way of speaking. So it's vertical, hierarchical in a certain way. But it is not really an order. It is just like that. But the master of parrèsia also induced a sort of good disposition, which was named eunoia, translated in Latin by benevolencia, badly translated in Chinese as ren. Among the students who are invited to be honest and therefore to trust one another. Because the master has no fear for speaking the truth, everybody seems to be confident to tell what he has to tell. So, horizontally, vertically. And it is the basis of the formation of a camaraderie, itself founded on parrèsia, but obviously here on horizontal modes, or equal modes. Another perspective on parrèsia can be found in Galen. Galen was a Roman physician, doctor in medicine, very famous, and philosopher. So Galen's main thesis is that a man cannot cure himself of his illusion and passions because he cannot be his own judge. Given a certain relationship to himself that is always based on either self-indulgence or self-denigration. So we need someone, and always someone else, in order to free ourselves from illusion and patience. And the crucial question then is who to choose to fill such a role. And that's where the parrèsia comes in, which is revealed in someone absolutely unflattering character. The possible director of conscience, the advisor for you to become someone, a subject, must always speak very, very frankly. Someone not nice at all, without any form of flattery, so that this sense of truth in the exchange about yourself, non-flattery, is permanently transmitted and integrated into your own relationship with yourself. Another criterion is probitas in Latin. That is to say that the master of parrèsia, or the director of conscience, must have proven himself. This is a very Roman criterion, probatio. The proof, to prove yourself, comes from that vocable, probatio, probe, which is very closely linked with experience, having really lived your own life. And two criteria then, we've got frankness, never fear to tell the truth, even it is harsh, don't care. And probity, mean being a man of experience. Knowing that probity gives the power or independence to the franchise, to telling the truth. So for Galen, the master of parrèsia is neither a soul specialist, a sort of psychologist. He's not a technician, a doctor, or philosopher. Don't need to be that. But he's not neither or nor a friend. No specialist, no friend. The condition for a just parrèsia in Galen is therefore a form of radical neutrality of the master. That's quite interesting. That is to say, in a certain way, some sort of doctor, without being a specialist of the self or of the soul. But someone who is able to tell you, from a good point of view, the truth about yourself. Seneca's approach to parrèsia is pretty different. unlike Philodemus, according to Seneca, the space or the field of parrèsia is not very collective, but unfold in individual relationships from one person to another one, and especially from the cultivated person to cultivated person. It is quite an elitist relationship. It is the high moment, according to Seneca, of culture in its precise interpersonal relationship. And this enables speech to abandon eloquence or rhetoric to attain the great simplicity of speaking, the magna simplicitas, so that it gives the way only to truth, quae veritati dat operam. And this simplicity of impersonal speech, of interpersonal speech, is added also the requirement of a certain order. That is not, of course, the dramatic one or the order of eloquence, but that of deepening the depths of the truth. You have to speak, not blah, 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 how you, no. You have to speak together in a way to go deeper, always. That's also parrèsia, the movement of parrèsia. You need a friend to endeep your own relationship to truth. This is de profundis. Go deeper, 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 deeper. Seneca also speaks about animi negotium, the trade of souls. This is what parrèsia enables and aims at, the soul's trading, to endeep the relationship to truth. And this is only possible with a friend, one-to-one, not collective. According to Seneca, the aim of parrèsia is to reveal thought or to reveal deep feelings. But why? Precisely in a view of this libertas, of this free relationship of self to the self, which also enables the advent of true speech. So parrèsia here becomes both a means to yourself, but also the end of the practice of yourself. Okay. Next session, I will summarize this because now it will become much more a general conclusion, and we will enter into the government of the self and other, and just the last part of that course, because all the beginning is a strange moment according to Kant. As I told you, it's not, I don't know why he spoke about that. I think because he was reading that text at that moment. The second part of the course is some sort of summary of what was done last year, so it's not very useful for us. But the last part is interesting. And after that, for the two last second courses, we will see the last course of Foucault entitled The Courage of Truth, which takes back many themes that we saw here, but he will speak about the cynic schools of philosophy, that is the punk. And here we've got another relationship to truth speaking, that is to say, not for discovering yourself, but for fucking the power. That is to say, the discipline or the technique of telling the truth means something deeply political. It challenged the power, always. And you have to assume a weird position, which was the cynical position, which is also a philosophical position. And so, during the government of the other, and of the self and the other 1 and 2, the 2 was entitled Courage of Truth, we've got the figure of the philosopher, as how to become a philosopher. That's the question. Not any kind of self, but a philosopher's self. And that's the last part of the second course and some elements of the third courses given by Foucault. But the most important of these three courses is that one. Far away from the other. Because it's much more important to become yourself than just become a philosopher. I believe. So see you next week.